and welcome to this evening's presentation of Tongues Untied and Looking for Langston. I'm happy to have been invited by the Nottingham Contemporary to give an introduction to these movies this evening. I was a civil rights activist in the 1980s and 1990s, a member of the National Lesbian Gay Youth Movement, ACT UP, Queer Nation, and the Stop Clause 28 Coalition. It's been a while since I've been a full-on activist, but what I'm going to talk about primarily is the times around which these films were made. I was born into a racist, sexist, and homophobic society, so I guess we'll all have something in common. Though I hesitate to use the word we. We is the language that overlooks, the appropriation that doesn't allow for difference. So if there is anyone here who feels as though they didn't grow in a society, at least subtly awash with gender proscriptions, race proscriptions, and sexuality proscriptions, speak up. Come down here. Show us the way. No? No. That's the first dangerous moment over with. So, I can safely say we were born into a racist, sexist, and homophobic society, even the youngest here. And we do not even now live in a society that is post-gay, post-race, and post-gender, as some recent uncomfortable theorists contend. Perhaps here in the developed world, we live in a society that is now neo-sexualized, neo-raced, and neo-gendered. In a neo-colonial world of new entrenchments, in reworked configurations, but nonetheless in configurations of the valid and the invalid identities of now. And who still does not know that we live in a society that is raced, sexualized, and gendered, in which they and their bodies are raced, gendered, and soon sexualized? Only those whose path of life is privileged and naturalized and smoothed into oblivion and ignorance due to that privilege, due to their never running up against contradiction and denial based on their gender, race, and sexuality, or based on their poverty. Only, therefore, the most ignorant. Privilege is an unfortunate condition. It is a condemnation to a life of oblivion. Pity the ignorant and their oblivion. Pity the privileged. Pity the stupid. But it's easy for me to say that. I am alive. I was an IV drug-using gay man in San Francisco in the 1990s, and I am alive. I saw the dying swathes when I thought I was heading to a city of liberation. It's easy for me to say, pity the privileged. I am not an African American being gunned down on the streets of America for the color of my skin. I am alive. But I have seen the dying swathes. I was beaten up by the NYPD on the streets of New York City the day after Rudolph Giuliani was elected mayor. Not because I was gay, not because I was black, but because I was a drug user. Let me rephrase that. Because I was gay, because I was black, if I can borrow some skin. My father said racist things. I said racist things. My father said sexist things. I said sexist things. My father said homophobic things. I said homophobic things. We didn't know how pernicious this was to others, to ourselves, to the black friend I had when I was 10 years old, the only black kid in the school at that time, pernicious, to him, to me, pernicious, to our friendship. Because the best way of hurting yourself is by hurting others. The best way of containing yourself is by containing others and putting them in negatory emplacements. Racism, sexism, and homophobia are two-way streets of vilification. Pity the self-destroying racists. Pity the self-destroying sexists. Pity the self-destroying homophobes. This is the triumph of resolve. There is a Swahili saying, "I am other people." This is the apotheosis of politics. Until I was 14, I grew up in Ruddington, a village just 3 miles south of here, but for me, at least, worlds and lives and deaths away. When I was 9 years old, it was noticed that I was getting too affectionate with a friend. By whom? I don't know. How? I don't know. But one blue afternoon, as I was walking to my friend's house from school in Ruddington, a girl of 6 or 7 appeared from out of nowhere in front of me on the path. "You're a Mo, you are. We know you are," she said, and disappeared. I stood dumbfounded as this first category seared into me. I remember distinct in its concrete grey the square metre of pavement I stood on, the dropped curb near someone's driveway. When I looked up, the messenger was nowhere to be seen. Who was this we who knew? Who was I, now negatively proscribed? It was those darkies, yeah, the darkies, they did it. A Mo you are, we know you are. Every day from the moment we are born, the categories are placed, the positive and negative valuations, the infant is confined. Even when these categorizations move toward equal valuing, they're nonetheless categorizations. Fundamental to society as currently constructed, whole populations hungrily grasp new definitions and new valuings and devaluings, and we believe ourselves further along, free of discriminatory politics, less confined. But this equalization of all identities is also a desperate need of identity within an identity system, an identity of the me, the self, the individual, as equal to but different from you, with my separate needs and requirements, my separate self. There is a redelivery of identity. There is a panic of identity. Everyone must have one. And this separate identity is clung to ever more desperately, with almost a covetousness becoming a neurosis. And so the emancipatory and communal projects of the civil rights movements are reassimilated to the ontological individuation. Just me putting a big word in there. The emancipatory and communal projects of the civil rights movement are reassimilated to the ontological individuation of contemporary consumer capitalism, and our old identities and comings together are sold back to us as individual styling choices on the clothing racks of H&M. The homophobic, heterosexual architecture of the world. Have you ever noticed how homophobic buildings are? In their institution, in their bricks and mortar? Have you ever noticed how buildings reject you? How they speak of your otherness and your exclusion? How they close their doors and turn their backs? How, when you walk along the street, they sneer at you and rub their architecture in your face? The white heterosexual project, their schools and churches, their cemeteries and offices, their domestic dwelling places designed for nuclear families. Do you see the ideology of every brick taunting you? The privileged are ignorant indeed. They know not what they say, they know not what they do, they know not what they build. Social geographers describe how gay bars are still on the edge of town and down the dark alleys. The New Art Exchange is in Hyson Green. But there is some progress through all the bullshit of being gay, the bullshit of being black, the double bullshit. May the 17th each year now is International Day Against Homo, Trans and Biphobia. And as I walked around the city at the beginning of last week, rainbow flags flew above the council house. above the castle, above the Notts Police HQ, above the Notts County Football Ground, and above John Lewis. It was very friendly. The architecture supported me. The building said, "Hello, we're on your side." A city almost entirely the same and almost entirely changed. An open city, a welcoming and acknowledging city. Suddenly, my city as much as anyone's. The buildings sang hello and sang their esteem. And I thought, is this what it's like to be the heteronormative, the white hetero male into whose fold I am now admitted, given on an ongoing basis all these supports, all these affordances for myself to be sustained, all this beckoning and open and smiling possibility for my life? Langston arrived. In 1983, I had sat in Gatsby's Gay Bar, which is over the other side of Oceana, now a Chinese restaurant and karaoke venue. One summer evening in 1983, it was light, so the curtains were still open, in the time when they used to draw the curtains when you could see inside, so that people couldn't see what was going on inside there, and a half brick was lobbed through the plate glass window behind my back. Such memories, like the half brick of the girl when I was 9 years old, are etched in the guts and on the skin. The skin, as much as anywhere, is where differences are written, like scars. When I was 20 years old, I had sex with a 19-year-old man. This was a criminal offence, as it still is in 79 countries of the world, in 5 countries punishable by death. The 1980s saw the beginning of that scythe of prejudice welling up from suppression and discrimination that cut through the gay population of the decade, HIV. Even members of my own family would repeat this joke to me. What's gay stand for? Got AIDS yet? Positive images of gay and lesbian people were non-existent in the mainstream, and indeed even legislated against by the Thatcher government. And Margaret Thatcher's legacy in that regard is the homophobic legislation directly modelled on Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988, now being put in practice in Russia. The current homophobia in Russia is a direct part of Thatcher's legacy. Pity the ignorant. Pity the gay and lesbian people of Russia. With no positive images in Britain in 1990, I fled to America, the promised land, which is crazy in itself, me, a boy from Nottingham, to be driven so far looking for love and looking to be loved, looking for Langston, at the time these films were made. I made my way to San Francisco, gay Mecca. I worked by living under a false identity. I had no qualms about this non-citizen status, as the illegal immigrant that I had felt myself to be anyhow, even in my own country, displaced. Who do you identify with? What is offered? In the 1980s, San Francisco was a devastated city. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I never had seen. A chapel was built in the midst, where I used to play on the green. And the gates of this chapel were shut, and "Thou shalt not" writ over the door. So I turned to the Garden of Love that so many sweet flowers bore. And I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. William Blake, 1789. To make a trans-historical association, as gay and lesbian studies and gay and lesbian people were wont to do at that time, for some security, for some valuing, for some explanation, looking for Langston. The tombstones and cremations of San Francisco folded into the tombstones of the fear-disseminating adverts of the National Health Service back in Britain. The AIDS Don't Die of Ignorance campaign, with its saturation in death. the British tactic for stemming a national crisis, making everybody afraid of sex and sexuality and the designated carriers of sex and sexuality. Although I joined up with Queer Nation, an activist group in San Francisco, I was already too primed and too despairing. And so began the episode of my life that ended on a New York street with the NYPD 5 years later. Because of my drug use, not because I was gay, not because I was black, you understand. However, on a brighter note, in Ireland this last weekend, not only did the population consent to allowing lesbian and gay marriage, they actually turned out and proactively demonstrated their support of lesbian and gay relationships and lesbian and gay people. Things are better today. Are things completely resolved, or are new denials and negations afoot? The children of now will tell us tomorrow. There are political parties in Britain which, while they claim not to be racist, reinstate and reimpose the parameters of racism, implanting them again in the hearts of the people. And there are those who would divide and separate even in the very process of assimilation. What denials and nullifications are currently being made? The children of now will tell us tomorrow, or the marginalised of today can tell us now, if we listen, pity the ignorant, and remove them from power. In reality, everybody is looking for Langston, and in love, Langston is everywhere. I was on a panel discussion in Leicester in 2013 as part of the States of Independence Book Fair, discussing the perilous position of LGBT publishing in Britain. A woman in the audience asked a question I foolishly tried to answer instead of just asking her to leave. "Why do you keep banging on about being lesbian and gay?" she asked. "Why don't you write about something more universal if you want to get published?" I should have asked her if she'd been to the Asian writers group at the same book fair and asked them, "Why do you keep banging on about being Asian? Why don't you write about something more universal?" Or the Black, British and Afro-Caribbean writers group. "Why do you keep banging on about being black? Why don't you write about something more universal?" What's available to universal understanding is in the eye and prejudice of the beholder. If you can't see the universality in the language of love, whoever is expressing it, then you are lost indeed. Everybody lives on the same globe, in identical bodies. Everybody's life is available for identification and entering into. There are common causes to be found everywhere, and there are identifications to be made. No one is self-sustained. The question is, are you able to find that openness, the availability of those identities which sustain you in your identity, which are therefore not other than yourself and your own constitution? And if not, why not? Where did this neurosis come from, this self-clinging in restricted self-identities? Where have these separations come from? Why do they condition me, and how do I break them down? Why are some people required to run so far in looking for love, in seeing another like themselves in the tumult of history, in looking for Langston? What the oppressed and marginalised demand is first, recognition. This allowance alone is a reconfiguration of the ignorant. May the light stream into their dim brains. We are the generous. We are the givers. Please appreciate the blood and the sweat of these films. Thank you.